Hello and welcome to IIFL Securities YouTube channel. I am Shweta Pabriwal, and today in our Leaders Speak series, we have Mr. Kalpin Parekh, President, DSP Investment Managers. Welcome, Mr. Parekh. It's a pleasure to host you today and gain insights from your knowledge and experience.
Hi, thanks for inviting me. Thanks, Shweta.
So, sir, let us first start with the industry. How do you think the mutual fund industry has performed during the last 1 year? Has the equity market rally helped in augmenting AUMs for the MF industry? And has this also been the case for DSP Mutual Fund?
Yeah, so Shweta, there are two ways in which we analyze performance for us as well as the industry. One is the growth in number of customers, the number of unique folios, the number of people who are selling mutual funds. These are more important operating metrics,
right,
apart from the final outcome, which is the AUM. So obviously the AUMs have swelled and grown in the last 2-3 years, including the last 1 year, because of a significant mark-to-market impact. So even if we had done nothing and gone home last year when lockdowns were announced and done nothing at all for the next 12 months, the equity AUMs would have risen by 30% because stock prices have gone up. NAVs have gone up. So that was the impact of the second dimension of our business is growing the number of units. Are there more people buying more units? I think on that dimension also, there is very respectable progress achieved by whether DSP or the fund industry, because we have seen all through in the last 12 to 18 months, which were phases of huge anxiety in life, in terms of health, in terms of careers, in terms of cash flows. We have seen a reasonable amount of maturity of investors with their long-term investment plans. See, one thing is to say that, okay, markets are running up, so, let me just go in and make a quick buck and get out. So, that is one way of also investing. But what the mutual fund industry tends to promote or highlight is the long-term, invest over decades and build your long-term wealth. And on that front, I'm pleased to say that we have seen significant progress, diversity of investors increasing, number of people who are becoming advisors or distributors is increasing, the number of systematic investment plans which are designed for 5, 10, 15 and 20 years, those numbers are increasing. There is bias for asset allocation products. The most popular product in the last 1 year still remains dynamic asset allocation funds. Which tells us that the investor is not only chasing past returns. The investor is also chasing systematic products which can help them navigate volatility and build their investment plan. So I'm very happy with the progress. Profitability also has gone up in line with AUMs, so on and so forth. And we hope that the journey continues in a stable, consistent, durable manner.
Right. So as you mentioned that, the last 1 year owing to the pandemic has been really difficult. So some of us have lost lives, others livelihood. So what is the impact on India's healthcare infra has also been massive. Now, as the individual states move to lower restrictions and unlocking, do you think it will be enough to help restore Indian economy? Will the industry, both manufacturing and services, see an improvement? And what about the consumer confidence also?
So let me answer consumer confidence. That hasn't yet, reverted back to its past highs. And over the last 12 to 18 months, naturally, so the consumer confidence has declined lower because a lot of people universally have got impacted, and especially people who are in industries where work cannot be done from home, where you actually need to be on the site or at your workplace. And a large part of formal as well as informal employment is in such pockets. People like us are very fortunate that, sitting at the comfort of our homes through technology and digital, we can continue to work. But that is a small percentage of the workforce. So large part of workforce and industries have got impacted over the last 18 months. And while the top companies, the top 1 or 2% companies in every industry have flourished or, got advantage of this phase of weakness in the rest of the economy. So the workforces in these type of companies have definitely got impacted, which has resulted in consumer confidence being on the lower side. So if you see even the recent RBI report, which was released, highlighting the trend in consumer confidence, it is significantly trending downwards. Now, on the other hand, what has really been surprising is that in spite of massive lockdowns and, stoppage in, ability to sell products in the last year, companies have increased their profits. Companies have increased their margins. Companies have reduced their cost structures. Companies have reduced their debt on the balance sheets. So while the health of retail India has weakened, the health of corporate India, which is available to us in the listed universe, the top 50, 100, 200 companies, their health has actually improved. Correct. So that's the dichotomy. And that improvement in health has resulted in stock prices really surprising all of us. And that, of course, supported with virtually zero interest rates in the rest of the world, low interest rates in India, very high amount of liquidity. All of that has helped stock prices keep moving up. And of course, they have been aided by partly fundamentals also, because profitability has just inflected back. Over the last 12, 13 years, every year, if you look at the EPS estimates for the index, they would start at a certain number and the year would end by the numbers being reduced lower. So estimates are always ending the year lower. But now in the last year, for the first time, the upgrade cycle has started. So that has reflected in better stock prices and overall markets doing well. Companies have improved their health, the good companies, not at large. So it's like a pyramid. The top companies have consolidated, have taken advantage of this volatility in the environment to their benefit, and they have benefited by growing market share, by cutting costs and becoming in their business.
While you were talking about the health of the corporate Indian companies, and also continuing with this, how have the first quarter results helped you cement your long-term view, or are they responsible for any tweaks on the long-term basis?
Okay, so we still there are two ways to look at this. There is level one data point which I highlighted. Significant inflection in profitability, in cost going down. The second level effect, the second order effect, which generally takes time to play out, is yet unknown to us. For us to really make any big shifts in our long-term view, and we'll have to wait and watch for the next year or so that this profitability, is this durable or is this one time? The prevailing cost structures that have come out of the last year of pandemic, are they likely to remain here, or will they move up again as the world opens up, travel starts again? Some costs which could be controlled while everything was shut will go up again when the world normalizes. So we'll have to see how these things pan out. So I don't want to guess or astrologize about the future, but there are some big shifts happening in the constitution of profitability, in the constitution of earnings.
Correct.
So a large chunk of profitability in the current cycle has come from what had taken away the profitability in the past cycle, which is commodity companies, which is metal companies, which is energy companies, which is banks which had done huge amount of corporate lending and were grappling with NPAs. And as the cleanup of bank balance sheets gets probably over, more income coming back is leading to inflection in profitability. And then there were the traditional steady sectors in terms of profit generation, like IT and pharma and consumers. They continue their steady journey. One sector which remains still weak is the auto sector, where somewhere the world is pricing in that because of the massive disruption that will happen on the electric vehicle side. How to really price these auto companies? Do they have a long-term future, or will there be so much of disruption that the current valuations also could look high? So that sector is going through its phase of a discovery of what should the future look like. But otherwise, we have seen cement companies, companies from the core sector really bouncing back because of also underlying commodity prices globally going up, because of partly massive supply shortages and partly the underlying commodity price itself increasing. So we do see some of these, like while we talk today, there is no metal stock in the Nifty, right? And very soon a metal stock will come into the Nifty, but after a 3 to 5 times rise in its stock price. So that's how the last year has been, a bit unusual in terms of extrapolating what we had seen between 2015 to 2020. The trends are changing. And to that extent, we have adjusted our portfolios. We run diversified portfolios. So we never make big swings because when we manage, roughly 1.2 lakh crores of overall AUM, we can't keep swinging the portfolio. The markets are not liquid enough for big swings. But on the margin, what we have done over the last 12 months, not today, but let's say 12 months back, when prices were in significant flux,
Right.
we had increased our exposure to technology stocks. We had marginally increased exposure to pharma stocks because they'd already run up pre-COVID also. We had increased our exposure to cement companies because cement is one of the best way to play the capex cycle without any debt on the balance sheet. Most cement companies are highly capital efficient. And we had marginally increased exposure on the commodity side, mainly because they are deeply cyclical and you don't know how to extrapolate the price hikes. But those are some tweaks that we had made. And the core of our portfolios is not sectoral in its thinking. It's basically thinking around operating matrix of businesses, which is companies with consistent ROEs, companies which don't need too much of capital to run the business, and companies which are growing their market share. So that remains the core of our portfolio. At the margins, these are some of the tweaks that we have made.
Right. So now, shifting the focus to equity markets, which were actually an isolated shining ray of light amid all this gloom. So do you see the markets going even further from current levels, and how should retail investors, act? Should they continue to buy on dips or should they be cautious? And as we know that, the fears of future waves has also not been ruled out. So how do you see markets playing out?
See, honestly, Shweta, I don't know, because had you asked me last year in April, May or June, that 1 year later, will markets be significantly higher? Will small cap stocks be 100% higher than where they were last year? I would have said no. So my track record on making these forecasts is very poor. So, whatever I say, you please take it with a pinch of salt. My take is an investor should invest independent of current market conditions, depending on what his objective is. If objective is short-term investments, then fixed income funds and debt funds should be part of the portfolio and not equity funds.
Right.
If investments are medium-term, then hybrid funds should be a part of portfolio. Again, not only equity funds. And if investments are truly long-term, which is 10 years and above, then what is happening today has less on the results 10 years down the line, because over time, earnings growth will take care of most of the returns. Having said that, I do feel that stock prices are higher than what I would have liked them to be, especially for companies that we like to invest in.
Right.
In our complex language, we would say that valuations are higher than their past history. And can you and I do anything about it? The answer is no. All we can do is, tweak our asset allocation here and there a little bit. So if I feel valuations are very high, my asset allocation, let's say, says I should be 70 in equity, maybe I can keep 65 or 60 in equity. Yeah. That's the marginal tweak here and there that I can make. But more importantly, the way to invest is to moderate return expectation, then recognize that when cost of capital comes down. So, for example, when interest rates are down to 0 to 1% globally or down to 4 to 6% in India, returns from profitability or returns from stock markets cannot be 15 to 20% like they were 10 years back, because 10 years back interest rates were also at 9 and 10%. So they have halved. So I think as an investor, I have moderated my return expectation, but I do know that on a real rate basis, as long as my equity portfolio or my combined portfolio of debt and equity can beat inflation at large, can generate superior returns over fixed income at large over a 5 to 10 year horizon, I am a happy investor.
Okay. So now, coming to the number of IPOs that we have been seeing, what is your view on that? Should, our investors keep on investing on these on a case basis or continue subscribing for each of them, given that, getting an allotment is also difficult? And how to differentiate between, good companies and, with whether they have future potential or not?
See, a good investor will be able to differentiate. An investor who cannot differentiate should not invest. It's as simple as that. If you have the competency, please, go ahead and analyze these companies and then choose amongst the right companies. If you don't have the competency, quietly just invest in a mutual fund, because see, it's very clear that people who don't know why they are investing should not risk their hard-earned money by investing just because others are investing. And remember one thing, a lot of people don't know that IPOs are stocks. Because just the terminology IPO is different. IPO is nothing but an equity of a company.
Correct.
It is just coming into the market today. So it will have the same risk that a stock has. it will have the same risk that equity as an asset class has, and perhaps it may have slightly higher risk because some of these IPOs are coming at a price which is much higher than what
Yes.
the rest of the market is available at. So like an existing stock which has which has both the sides of risk and rewards. Likewise, an IPO stock also has the same risk and reward. And the decision whether to invest or not is a function of individually analyzing each IPO and understanding its business model, whether the profitability will continue and what price are you paying, and what is the company going to do with the cash that it is raising from the market.
Right.
Generally, at large, a very huge boom in IPO signals that there is ample liquidity looking and waiting to invest. And then on the other side, there is ample supply coming from promoters reducing their stakes and taking advantage of this liquidity. So,
right.
look at it this way. An IPO means someone is a seller on the other side. So when you are buying an IPO, there is someone who's selling also. So what is the thinking the other person has? Why is he selling? He's taking advantage of, these high prices. So not to say that all IPOs will not make money, but generally world over, data says that, if you make an index of all IPOs done in the history of our markets or the rest of the world, an index fund would have generated better return over a long period of time. Of course, there are few companies which transform and, which continue to do well and create huge wealth, right? But, historically, a lot of good companies had got listed at a very reasonable price, at fair valuations, or sometimes even at cheap valuations. Today, nothing is coming cheap. So being aware of that is very, very important. And I think just always ask this question, that when you are a buyer, there is a seller on the other side. And why is the other person selling?
That's a very good question to ask before investing. So now moving to asset allocation, interest rates continue to remain low, at very low levels. For some of our investors who are dependent on interest from FDs and dividends, what would your advice be? And also, the millennials who have flocked to equities in the last 1 year, how should they approach asset allocation?
The asset allocation, what is the concept of asset allocation? It is basically mixing of asset classes.
Yes.
Now, when you invest in 3 or 4 asset classes, all asset classes don't perform at the same time. So today, for example, my portfolio asset allocation has 4 asset classes. It has, and I invest only in mutual funds. As a rule, I invest only in DSP funds. I don't invest in stocks or underlying instruments directly. All of us in DSP, as a rule, follow that practice. Now, there are 4 asset classes broadly in my portfolio: Indian equity mutual funds, global equity mutual funds, debt funds, and gold funds. Okay. All 4 have different journeys. They will never go up or down at the same time. So when Indian equity is performing, and last 1 year was a example of that, gold gave minus 20% in my return. So my aggregate portfolio will never give me the best return. But what happens is that, I have the comfort. So today, when markets are falling or small caps are down between 10 to 20%, I don't have to worry, because my entire aggregate portfolio is still up 1%. Because in the last 10 days, when small caps have fallen, which is one part of the portfolio, but on the other hand, the international equity has gone up, gold has gone up in the last 5-10 days, and fixed income has been stable. So asset allocation at a very principal level is about, not panicking so much that you just get out of the market. Asset allocation, works well when markets don't work in our favor. So when things are bad, a good asset allocation will ensure you don't have large losses in your portfolio, and you don't have to lose your sleep, or you don't have to just panic and take your money out. And that is how one should look at asset allocation. Now, what should be the right asset allocation is a personal choice, is a function of what amount of fluctuations can you bear or digest in your portfolio. So I know for a matter of fact that, from a cash flow point of view, because I am a salaried employee and my cash flows will continue, from a cash flow point of view, volatility should not bother me at all. I should never worry about a 20-30% correction in stock prices or equity funds. But emotionally, my makeup is such that if my portfolio drops by 20%, it hurts my ego. That how can I, not get the market right, or how could I not, see this coming? And hence my asset
Right.
allocation is a bit more conservative than most other people of in my circle. So it's a personal choice is all that I'm trying to highlight. I'm not saying my asset allocation is right or yours is right. It's a personal choice, and the variables that should help you determine your asset allocation is your time horizons. What is the need of cash flow? When will you need the money from your portfolio? And what is your ability to absorb volatility?
Absolutely.
So,
Yes.
so if my need for cash flow is near term, if my ability to absorb volatility is low, and my time horizons are also low, then I will be more conservative in my asset allocation, and vice versa. So that is how. So today,
Correct.
just to complete this question, my personal asset allocation today is around, I think, 40 rupees in funds which invest in Indian equities, around 20 rupees in funds which invest in international equities, and around 30 rupees is in fixed income, short-term bond funds, and 10 to 12% is in funds which invest in gold mining stocks. And some amount of sovereign
Right.
gold bonds. So that is a de-risking part of the portfolio, which is hurting me right now, because last 1 month when everything has gone up, it is down 20. But it's okay.
It
When
is now,
everything was
yes.
falling, yeah. So I think that's how I have designed it, which is my personal choice. So I think each investor should know why is he investing for, what is his personality, and then take advice from the right advisors, distributors, consultants to form that asset allocation.
So, Mr. Parekh, if you could share the objective of the OFO that you've come out with, and what response did you see to the new concept?
Shweta, first of all, the name OFO means, if you expand it, it's old fund offer. So there's nothing new about it. It is not a new concept.
Okay.
What are we saying? In investing, don't chase the new unless the new adds value to you. If old has delivered, take advantage of the old. So we looked at our oldest equity fund and our first equity fund. Its name is BSP FlexiCap Fund. It has been around for 24 years now. In these 24 years, it has seen multiple ups and downs. It has seen phases of very fast rise in NAVs, crash in NAVs, a phase of no returns for 3-4 years, just in line with how the equity asset class behaves. A primary objective of an actively managed fund is it should be able to generate better returns than its underlying benchmark. Its underlying benchmark is the Nifty 500. It has generated over the last 24 years, I think almost 6 to 7% excess returns over the underlying benchmark. But forget 25 years. Even in the last 5 years, when beating benchmarks has been challenging, it has been able to generate between 2 to 4% superior excess returns over the benchmark. So it tick marks most of the things that matter in good investing. It is flexible across market cap. So it doesn't choose any one market cap. It is diversified across sectors. It has all the 8 or 9 relevant sectors which matter. It has a well-defined investment philosophy. It has a clearly articulated 12-page document which highlights how does the fund think, how does the fund manager think, what are the principles around which it invests. Now, when you have all of that, we realize that only 23 investors have stayed invested in this fund over the last 24 years. And one of the reasons is that sometimes in the quest of new, we ignore the old, which is sometimes cold. So I personally, like this fund a lot. It is the largest investment in my own personal portfolio. A simple, disciplined, it's a no jazz fund. So we felt we should just, respect its track record and give it more attention. And just to capture attention, had we not coined the word OFO, it would have not got anyone's attention. But just because we coined the word OFO and did some amount of promotion behind it, people started asking me, OFO hota kya hai? Because हमने NFO सुना है, हमने IPO सुना है, OFO क्या है? So our thought was to say that OFO is a old fund offer. It's an existing time-tested fund. Please, consider it if it suits your long-term investment horizon. Your second question is what has been the response? Our response, I'm happy to state that, in a regular month, if we do a business volume of X, we've done a business volume of 3.5X so far. So I'm very happy that, people are, giving attention to old ideas, to existing ideas. And I've seen some of the other peers in the industry also have started highlighting back funds with track record. Because, the beauty of the fund industry is that it now has funds with 20, 25, 30-year track records. And if we are able to make our investors, think long term by looking at these track records, the journeys of ups and downs, and help our investors learn the right principles of investing using this history, it will take the industry, into a more durable path. And that is our attempt with this. Of course, we have a selfish objective of ensuring that this fund also grows in size and becomes, more scalable and adds value to our investors. At the end of the day, our investors should make money, and that is what we aim to achieve with this objective.
So before I close, Mr. Parekh, as you've already told us about your personal portfolio and how you have, allocated the assets across various asset classes. So if you could tell us that, has there been any one mistake which you feel you have committed while investing your own money and which our investors can learn from and avoid?
I think not just one, right? If I've been an investor for 25 years, I would have had more than 25 mistakes, because the more time you spend, the more mistakes you make. I think, summarizing all these mistakes into one or two groups is the biggest mistake that, I have made is a human mistake that we many times make on other dimensions of life also, is extrapolating the recent experience. So if the last 1 year numbers look very good for a particular fund, I would put more money in that fund and assume that the same will continue. On the flip side, if the last 1 or 2 year numbers look bad for a fund's return, the NAVs have gone nowhere or has come down, or the fund is temporarily underperforming its other peers, you assume this will continue forever and you get out of that fund. And this mistake actually disregards or disrespects the principle of reversion to mean. That in asset classes which have cycles, like equity as an asset class, reversion to mean keeps happening. So what does very well in one phase will underperform in the next phase, and vice versa. While in the long term it will deliver and do well, but there will be patches of underperformance and outperformance. As an investor, you should not get affected when a good fund underperforms, or you should not get blindly greedy when a bad fund outperforms temporarily. So that is one of the biggest mistakes. And over time, I have tried to curb these instincts to say that how to analyze a fund in the first place. And returns is not the only dimension. In fact, most of us first look at returns only because that is the easily available data point, right? The quickest way to analyze a fund is what is its last 1 year, 3 year, 5 year returns. But last 1 year, 3 year, 5 year returns is deeply influenced by the last 1 year return. And if 1 year has been very good or bad as an outcome of some randomness, it cannot be an important variable in your decision making. So understanding rolling returns, understanding whether the fund has significantly over long periods of time earned more than its benchmark, understanding when does it not do well, asking this question whether the fund has transparently communicated its investment approach, does the fund manager learn from his own mistakes. These are many variables that go into choosing the fund, right? So fund selection done around recency effect is a mistake that I've made a lot. And I would just hope investors avoid that mistake and have their own framework of deciding how to pick funds, because there are more than 1,000 funds today. So while choices are made to make your life better or easy, but choices can also confuse. So having a formula to choose the right funds becomes very important.
Sir, so one advice for our millennials and the young investors who are taking the route of investing in stock markets, what would be your advice to them?
My advice would be that remember these 4 words: this too shall pass. So the very fast returns of last year cannot be extrapolated in the future. Long-term returns generally are in the range of 10 to 15% at large for market as an asset class, and for very superior businesses, superior managements, and good industries. If you get the market cycle and the valuation cycle right, generally these returns over a long period can be 15 to 20%. The odds of any company earning more than that for very long periods of time are very low. So be aware of what is a reasonable return expectation. Accordingly, build your portfolio. Number 2, every 2 or 3 years, there are 10 to 20% corrections in equity asset class. Every 5 years, there is a 20 to 30% correction. Every 8 years, there is a 40% correction. But you will not know which is that first year or second year or fifth year. So be aware that prices can fall also. A lot of people have assumed that prices can move only in one direction upward. Prices can, go the other direction as well. And lastly, you mentioned about young and millennial investors. I will only say that the biggest variable in wealth creation is time. So what return you made in 1 year or 2 year or 3 year, honestly, is not material. What return will you make over 30 years is what will determine the amount of wealth that you create for your future. So give, respect time a lot, and being young, time is on your side. Take advantage of that. Most Indian investors, when we analyze that, okay, there are around 2.5-3 crore investors in the industry, you realize a lot of them start their investing journey seriously at the age of 35, 40, 45. After, they've got married and they have kids, and then they start realizing that I need to really plan for my future and my family's future. But investors don't start early. Thankfully, in the last 3-4 years, thanks to awareness, thanks to digitization, investors are starting early. But I just hope when you start early, you don't end early. You stay long and expand your overall time horizon and take advantage of compounding. So that is my hope and wish for all your young and millennial investors.
Thank you, Mr. Parekh. It was indeed a very insightful session with you. We hope to have you more on our platform. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Shweta. Thanks for inviting me. Have a nice day.